On the evening of September the 3rd, 2018, a young woman climbed into a vehicle believing she was going to a meeting. She never returned home. What happened during the next few hours would shock the entire country and become one of the most talked about criminal cases in modern Kenya. Her name was Sharon Otieno. She was 26 years old, a university student with dreams, ambitions, and a future that seemed full of possibilities. But her name would soon dominate headlines across the country. And years later, many Kenyans still remember the question that emerged after her death. What really happened that night? To understand the story, we must go back to the weeks before her disappearance. Reports had begun circulating about a relationship between Sharon and a prominent politician. As details slowly emerged, the situation attracted public attention and media interest. Sharon found herself at the center of a controversy that was becoming increasingly sensitive. Amid growing attention, meetings were arranged to discuss the situation. On the evening of September 3rd, Sharon met a journalist in Rongo. The purpose of the meeting was reportedly to discuss matters that can become increasingly important and complicated. At first, everything appeared normal, but before the evening could end, events would take a frightening turn. According to testimony later presented in court, several men intercepted the pair. Sharon and the journalist were forced into a vehicle. As the car traveled through the darkness, panic began to set in. The journalist later described realizing that something was terribly wrong. Fearing for his life, he made a desperate decision. He jumped from the moving vehicle. Injured but alive, he escaped and later alerted authorities. Sharon remained inside the vehicle, and that would be the last time she was seen alive. As news of the disappearance spread, concern quickly grew. Police launched investigations. Questions began to emerge. Who had taken Sharon? Where had they gone? And why had she been targeted? For the public, the situation was both shocking and confusing. A young woman had vanished, a journalist had narrowly escaped, and the circumstances surrounding the case seemed to become more troubling with every passing day. Then came the discovery that would change everything. Several days later, Sharon's body was found. The news sent shockwaves across Kenya. Suddenly, what had begun as a disappearance had become a murder investigation, and the country wanted answers. Who was responsible? What had happened during those final hours? And would justice ever be found? The investigation that followed would become one of the most closely watched criminal cases in Kenya's recent history. As investigators began piecing together the events of that night, attention quickly turned toward the people connected to the case. Police conducted interviews, witnesses gave statements, evidence was collected, and investigators worked to establish exactly what had happened. Over time, several individuals were arrested and charged in connection with the case. The court proceedings attracted enormous public attention. Each hearing brought new testimony, new details, and new questions. The surviving journalist became one of the key witnesses. His account of the kidnapping helped investigators reconstruct parts of the events that occurred on the night Sharon disappeared. As the legal process unfolded, the case became larger than a single crime. It sparked conversations across Kenya about power, influence, relationships, and justice. Many people followed every development, others waited patiently for the courts to establish the truth. Years passed. Court hearings continued, witnesses testified, evidence was examined, and the country watched closely as the legal process moved forward. Throughout the proceedings, those accused maintained their legal right to defend themselves in court, and the case continued through the justice system. For many Kenyans, however, the emotional impact of the tragedy remained. Sharon Otieno was more than a headline. She was a daughter, a student, a young woman with hopes and dreams. Her life ended before she had the opportunity to achieve the future she had imagined. The case also raised difficult questions. Could the tragedy have been prevented? Were there warning signs that had been missed? And what lessons could be learned from the events that unfolded? Even today, the story continues to be remembered, not only because of the investigation itself, but because of the conversations it started throughout the country. Conversations about justice, about accountability, and about the value of every human life. Sometimes the most haunting crimes are not those hidden in distant places. Sometimes they happen in ordinary towns, on familiar roads, during meetings that appear routine, and in moments when no one realizes that lives are about to change forever. Sharon Otieno's story remains one of the most significant criminal cases in modern Kenya, a case that captured national attention, a case that raised difficult questions, and a case that reminds us how quickly life can change, because behind every headline is a real person, a real family, and a future that was never allowed to happen. All this information is alleged and information drawn from the internet. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe to Motion Tales for more true crime investigations, untold histories, and powerful stories from Kenya and around the world.